Hi, everybody. All right. Thank you to everybody for showing up. Stoked to get the whole band back together. Just for the start of the video, I'm Daniel Holter. This is Agitare, community of practice for facilitation, sense making, design, and really anything where you have somebody using a framework or methods to guide sense making or problem solving in various contexts. Today we were going to talk about idea sorting and idea selection methods. Nash, I think you were the one who asked us to put this together. So thanks for putting that spark out there. This is how Agitare events happen, is when we see energy or interest from members of the community. That's my heuristic for whether we're going to do an event or not, is when other people show interest in an event. And then I'm like, oh, well, at least one person's going to show up. So bare minimum, we can have a conversation. And that's what I'm all about. So there are 2 or 3 currently identified idea sorting and selection methods. One of them is the pick chart, which has been popularized, I think, by Warfighter Centered Design. It's a really useful method. Can you all hear me okay? I'm in a loud room.
Loud and clear.
The one I was going to articulate was how, now, wow. And then I think Ethan was going to go over the must have, should have, could have, won't have. Is that right? Yeah. No, not you.
I can go for Moscow.
Okay.
Daniel used it.
I don't remember who said that. And then I wanted to talk a little bit. Ethan, did you have one you wanted to talk about?
Mostly just riffs on the pick chart.
Okay.
And like implementation difficulty and the experience that I've had that nobody ever kills any ideas. Like every idea I've had is good. Right? So like, how do you force people to actually get into letting go? Which is a little bit more maybe the liberating structure eco cycle, like birth, or like, I don't know, novelty, birth, maturity, and then creative destruction. But like, how do you plan for which ideas in the picture?
Here's one reason that I really like idea selection methods, is something that you just brought up, which is people seem to be obsessed with objective ideas of value, but that's not what they should be making decisions based on. They should be making decisions based on relative value. So if you've got a selection of ideas, it doesn't matter what the objective value is, because that's not determinable usually in this stage. What matters is how valuable are they compared to one another. So you just need to figure out what the order is. And one of them, when you're doing a pick chart, it's really important. Really, all that's important is to go, okay, which of these has the highest impact? Which of them has the lowest impact? And then when you force things into quadrants, and you say like, okay, we've got these 4 on top and these 4 on bottom. You make a rule and you say 2 can be on the top and 2 can be on the bottom. So the bottom 2 go into the kill or possible categories, right? So I might start with how, now, wow, because that one was the initial ask. And I'm going to share my screen to do this. How, now, wow is a weird tool that I learned from Game Storming. The book Game Storming is a great resource if you haven't read it. It's a fantastic resource for a variety of different what they call games for navigating information. And the way Game Storming works is it's like a lot of facilitated methods where you give people a limited number of a currency, and then they can place that currency on ideas that have been presented. So just so everybody's familiar with what we're talking about when we say idea prioritization, usually we're talking about having diverged, how do you then converge? And in idea prioritization, it's that maybe you diverged and on all the potential problems you were going to look at, and then you converged on which specific problems you're going to focus on, and you come up with a problem statement. And you diverge and you come up with a bunch of ideas. And this is a method of taking all those ideas and sorting them into categories to make the selection of an idea simpler, or to make it kind of follow some sort of logic. So in How Now Wow, you give people 3 different colors of dots. One of them is yellow, and that's for things that they believe are basically impossible given the current circumstances, but would have an enormous outsized impact. It's like that, well, this is a pipe dream, but it would really be amazing if we could do this thing, really aspirational stuff. It's my favorite idea that I think is impossible, right? The green dot is for things that are implementable, they're possible to implement, or even easy to implement, between easy and difficult, but not impossible. And they would have a massive impact, right? So it's that they are accessible, there are things we could do, and they would have a massive impact. And so that's the wow category. The things that are easy to implement and would have kind of an average impact, or they'd be highly acceptable, kind of the low-hanging fruit of what we should be getting after. Those are now, and you don't argue over whether things are now, how, or wow, which a lot of prioritization methods do. They have people negotiate where things are being placed on the chart. You just give people different colored dots, so they get to definitively pick which ones they think are now, which ones they think are wow, and which ones they think are how, right? And it's just this very rough gut feeling heuristic. And then you look at where the dots fell on all these ideas, right? Usually when you're doing something like this, I'd say you'll want to have pared down the ideas so that it's not like hundreds of ideas, but something that they can scan over and be able to make judgments about. So maybe up to like 40 ideas on a whiteboard or on a Miro board, and then they can place their dots. And then you take the ones with the most yellow dots and you put them on a chart where it says how. And you're like, wow, there's a lot of people who think this is a impossible to implement idea that would have a massive impact, right? And then you take the ones with the most green dots, put them at wow, and you take the ones with the most blue dots and put them at now. The rough rule is, now are obvious. Let's do those, right? That we can just knock those out because they're not difficult and they're just kind of obvious and they'd have some impact. Wow are things that we should definitely prioritize. So this is the sweet spot. It's original, it's going to have a big impact, and it's accessible. That's the group consensus is that this idea is the top voted wow idea. And then you've got the ones with the blue dots are the now ideas. So that's kind of the way the exercise works. Often in looking at what had been placed, you end up with really interesting conversations. Like if there's an idea that has like 6 yellow dots and 2 blue dots, you can ask who put blue dots on this idea, and can you describe why you think that it's easy to implement? And then they'll bring some things to the idea, or they'll expound on what the possibilities are, and it might actually change some people's minds or open up some conversation about what potential is there. So the disparity in how people voted provides avenues for conversation. And I've found it to be a really useful tool in that, one, you don't have to have conversation. You can go, okay, we're just moving forward with the wow ideas. Like, it's obvious that enough people think that these are great, that we can all have consensus that this is worth pursuing, right? So it can be a lot quicker than something like a pick chart, where they have to negotiate and get and talk through the placement of things, which is one of the reasons that I initially started using it for some workshops. And it can be a little bit, fuzzy if you don't know what the dots mean in advance, or people don't know what the dots mean. I think Barry had some questions about it in implementation. So Barry, do you want to pitch in any of your thoughts on this exercise?
So it was, I think a few months ago, I tried to use How Now Wow. And I think it was the people in the room weren't very familiar with using like dots to go and do that, like sticky notes or sticky dots. So I quickly like pivoted, and I was like, why don't I facilitate it in the way that we do like a traditional pick chart, right? Like so I did it in that way, right? Like, okay, let's now sort each one of these items based off of what you think is an original idea, like, and a normal idea, right? So we'll sort it that way. And when they said, well, what's an original idea? What's a normal idea? Original idea, it's like crazy innovative, crazy good idea that we wouldn't originally think of. And then from there, like racked and stacked, like lengthwise. And then we went to impossible to implement, right? Easy to implement. And so if it's impossible to implement, it's going to the top, and then they get in the right sections after doing that. Like the hows are in the right area and the wows. And it, for the group not being familiar with like that kind of facilitation, it's always eye-opening, and it's like, oh, that's an aha moment. Like, that's really cool that it did that. Like, I didn't think that this was going to happen. That was a little bit easier and a little bit like for a group consensus, because otherwise they were arguing about where each one of them were putting their dots, and trying to get people to be quiet and just do what they're supposed to do was kind of difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, one reason I like that activity is because they don't have conversation during the voting. And so that forces them into just reflection on what their gut instinct is and what their perspective is. Where I totally get what you're saying, that if they were like, spending too much time on it or being a little bit too analytical about it, that it could really get bogged down. So, I think that was probably a good idea to pivot to something where it's like, okay, well, let's just look at this on two axes, which is, what it is. It's a 2x. And I did want to talk about the 2x as a prioritization tool where you make up the axes, because I often find myself these days going, well, they need to figure out which of these is most important. And an example, and I can't just take, impact versus cost, like is a really common one, or impact versus difficulty. I need to make up my own criteria for them and have them, come, because for various contexts, you're going to have different criteria. So the example I'll give is when we did a workshop for the Space Force, that they were looking at what the future of Space Force enlisted professional military education should be. We came up with a method for where we had them generate what are the characteristics that you want people to come out of PME with. And they came up with a bunch of characteristics. They should be curious, they should be bold, they should be all these things. We had them pare them down to about how many we wanted on a chart, which I think was 12. So we came up with ways, we actually just broke people out into groups and said, your group can only bring, 3 of these to the chart. So as a group, you have to figure out which of them is most important to you or which you believe. Give them they can come up with their own method for figuring out which ones they're going to bring out of that conversation. And then we had a 2x, and one axis was, what is the degree of importance? Like, if you could only have one of these, which would it be? That goes on the top. And if you could only have 2 of these, which 2 would they be? And then you have the most important one, and then the second most important one. So it's level of importance as an output of a characteristic. And then on the x-axis, we had, how much does current PME currently produce this? How effectively does it currently produce this? And so with some of them, it was like management skills. They were all the way to the right. They were like, PME nails it with teaching people management skills, right? And so those were the x-axis. That was the x-axis, was how well are we currently served by this? And then all the way on the left, I believe it was, what is their, like, it was character. It was things that are like, they are, a servant leader or something. And there's a good reason for things being the way that they fleshed out. But the reason we wanted that as our 2x was because we wanted them to pick things that we thought could actually be affected by PME. So it was really important for them to compare these characteristics on how much does PME actually affect these. So that's just an example of a custom 2x that we generated based on what we were going to be doing next. Does anybody have anything else to add about how wow now or 2x's?
I do have a quick question. I may have missed it earlier, but when you do the dot coloring or the voting with colored dots, do you limit how many dots each person has, or do you tell them everything gets a dot, and then based on the general quantities of colors, do you pick from there which one it goes to?
Yeah, with dot voting, you are giving people a limited number usually. That's not always the case. There are certain exercises where you can give people an unlimited number of dots. For example, in like a retrospective, where the dot just means, +1, totally. I'm all about this. But in this case, because the goal is to pare it down, you need them to prioritize. So you give them scarcity, and how many you give people depends on how many people there are and how many choices they're choosing between. So if there are, in the case of how now wow, since I usually want, if I think I want 3 ideas in each of these corners, ideally, or I want a max of 10 ideas, based on how many people are here, how many dots do I give each person? Usually it ends up being like 1 or 2 dots per person in the case of how now wow. But then there's going to be cases where you need to break a tie or something, and you're like, okay, everybody gets 1 more, wow vote, and they can pull a green dot and go, this is the wow idea, right? Among these 2, and so you always limit it, and then you can always give people more dots in order to, really judge what they think. Or if you see people learn the criteria better in the course of the conversation, and they're like, oh, I just realized, you can give them an extra dot to correct what just happened, right? So yeah, it's always a limited, initial number. So yeah, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Nash, did I answer your question about how to execute that exercise?
I have the vague idea or the notion of how it works, but I feel like a lot of facilitation stuff, something you got to do. to really grasp it. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna take it and start practicing it, because I want to have more in my toolbox for when it comes to idea prioritization. And this seems like a good one, an easy one.
Yeah, it can be a little thorny. So always have something in your back pocket, like even if it's just rough dot voting, or have a pick chart on the side that you can always defer to when you're like, okay, that's not working. Let's switch to just a rough, like a pick chart. Ethan, do you want to add anything before you have to jump off?
There's a couple of places on the web where you can get like full facilitated instructions for the Eisenhower matrix is also another prevailing term for this, like urgency and importance. And so untools is probably my favorite like aggregator of improving your decision making. So just like other things that you can do related to this. I'm going to have to jump off. So I wanted to say a couple of other like non-traditional concepts, but are related to the idea of idea sorting. I would almost always recommend considering a customer journey map as like an individual user and figuring out like where are they experiencing really shitty circumstances, and then a little bit of leverage. And this was related to, I think, what Daniel was talking about in terms of how effective are our current practices to meeting needs, right? That brought customer journey mapping to mind. There's sort of two riffs on the Eisenhower matrix. One is you have a small number of ideas and you're trying to get every individual to sort of like put those 3 ideas somewhere on the matrix, and then like you get an emergent outcome. That's easier if you have the ability to mask individual decisions before they are revealed to the group. Otherwise you can get anchoring, like, oh, somebody else said this was a good idea, so I'm going to just pile on. So those are really important, just psychological concepts to try and defeat if possible. So like dot voting, if somebody gives it a green dot or a yellow dot, like that influences, right? It's like the best predictor of whether somebody gives a homeless person money is somebody else also giving them some money. Mm-hmm. And so like these human behaviors, often you have to figure out a way to circumvent kind of the easy button that people are hitting, which is like, I'm going to rely on peer pressure to help me make my decision. So the liberating structures, I think, does a good job of this. Like you read the idea on one side of the card and you mentally evaluate it before you flip it over and write it down next to all the other rankings. But that's imperfect also. I mean, lots of people just flip the card over, anchor, and then score. So I put the liberating structures 25-10 on there. The last thing at the bottom of pick charting, sometimes it's useful to just have 3 bins. Like, is this mediocre, interesting, or like incredible? And just instead of an infinite variety of things, just like put it in one of the 3 boxes. And that's not as wickedly complex, but it helps people just, I only have to make 3 decisions, or that sort of like more than or less than. So anchor to something, the relative, I put an agile estimation video in here also, which talks about the power of relative estimates as compared to absolutes. But just using that, like, we're going to start with, washing your face and like everything with, we're just going to scale related to one thing we can all agree on. So just trying to do a couple of those things. Those are my additions to this video.
I like that you brought up the groupthink, because I kind of push back on the idea that groupthink is always to be avoided. And it's because sometimes what is most important in a phase of a workshop is ensuring that a group is coherent with each other, not is that they are kind of on the same page about what's important. And if they impact each other in thinking that something's important, then that you can use that energy and that alignment going forward. So I don't think, sometimes you do silent generation and you keep people having ideas separately from one another, in order to prevent groupthink so that they're having a bunch of diverse thoughts and not influencing each other too much. But in the case of something like Deflection Point or the Mountain, where they're putting ideas up and it's sparking my ideas, and I'm seeing more things and it's making me go, oh yeah, no, totally, this is actually a really good direction. That's a form of groupthink. People are they're like entraining to one another's patterns, and they're kind of starting to run the same direction and influencing each other to go that direction. That is a useful energy to use. It's just important to know when you want to prevent them all from running the same direction and when you need them to be running the same direction, right? So dot voting can be useful when it creates groupthink if one of your major goals is to get them all just kind of aligned with each other, right? Does that make sense? It might sound counterintuitive because I think a lot of people are like, oh, groupthink, that's terrible. No, you kind of need it sometimes. It helps people work together and support each other and understand that they're working towards the same goals. That is a type of groupthink, and it's positive. John, welcome. It's great to see you. We were going to talk about PickChart. I think it's useful, since this video is about prioritization methods, to just run through how a PickChart is facilitated. John, you're kind of an expert at all things. Would you like to share really quick how you would describe or summarize really quick how we use a PickChart to prioritize ideas?
Totally, love to, and grateful to be here. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, you're good.
Using the right microphone, actually, while I'm thinking about it. Cool. Actually, Daniel, you inspired me to invest in an actual microphone. I haven't.
All right.
I've been neglectful and not thanking you for that. So let me talk about quote unquote the right way to do a pick chart, or at least the way that I have come to feel most strongly about, and then some common mistakes that people make. Actually, I'll do a little bit of both, right? One mistake that people make is to put the chart up on the board before they start sharing what the actual options are. It can anchor people. It also, usually you don't end up aligning what you are doing to where the chart actually is on the wall, because it's a comparative exercise, not an absolute exercise. So doing it correctly involves taking, let's say, actually, Daniel, do you mind if I share my screen?
Not at all.
Yeah, awesome. So let's imagine that we are working off of, here's a standard way to teach it, right? Let's imagine that we're protecting our home from zombies, as we all consider all the time in stark desire to be prepared for the inevitable end of the world. And the zombies are coming in the morning, and we gotta, it's like 10 o'clock now. We just got to survive until the pickup at 6. And we did a bunch of exercises to come up with things that we might do to protect ourselves against these ravening, light-attracted, fast-traveling, problem-solving zombies. We're talking like World War Z zombies, you know what I mean? None of this like shambling dead business. And we said like, well, we could pick up, let me zoom in here, guns and ammo. We could go get more food and water. We could barricade the doors. We could cover all light emitting apertures, windows, doors, etc., so that the zombies don't know that we're here. We could set booby traps. And actually, I don't even think we need a 6 one. Let's keep it simple here. So a good way this is the way I prefer to run PickChart, because it is so simple and because it is so much harder to screw it up. So you hold up, you pick any one of them, and you just set it arbitrarily on a wall. And you pick any of the others and you say, let's just start by asking which of these is going to do the most for our survivability, right? So I'm going to take this one, I want to put it over the other one and just say thumbs up if you think that the one I'm holding up top is going to be more important to our goal than the one on the bottom. And if you think it's the bottom, then put the thumb down. And in that way, you can arrange it so you don't have to talk at all over the course of this exercise. It can be a totally silent set of steps. So let's just do it in the room real quick. Who thinks that cover all light emitting apertures is more important than setting booby traps around the house?
Way more important.
Great. Easy, basically. Unanimous. Who thinks, how about this? Thumbs up, Daniel? Thumbs down. Cool. Great. Food, water. Get more food and water. Recall that we only got to be here for 8 hours. Great. Go pick up more guns and ammo. We already have some of each. What do we think? Cool. How about now? Great. How about now? Great. And were there a tie, I would break as the facilitator, but I don't need to. Cool. All right. Who thinks that setting booby traps is more feasible than getting food and water, which we'd have to pick up out in town? Philip, Justin, what do you think? Yeah, upward? Great. Who thinks that going out and getting more guns and ammo is more feasible than setting booby traps? Who thinks it's more feasible than going out and getting more food and water? Okay. Covering all light emitting apertures just inside the house. Easier or harder than going out and getting more guns and ammo in town? How about then food and water? Get more food and water out in town. Okay. How about then setting booby traps out in the yard? Boom. All right. How about barricading the doors? More feasible than that one? Shannon, what do you think? Yeah. Okay. Both seem to be the other way. More feasible than setting booby traps? Great. And then you come in and you want to draw lines that roughly bisect what you're looking at. So if you got 5 of these guys, it should be right down the third one. And it should be likewise right across the middle of the third one here. And there we have a chart, right? So things up here are going to be high impact, high feasibility, that is low difficulty, great. Things down here, which means implement. The possibles are going to be over here on the left. If it's low impact but high feasibility, maybe, right? Bottom right corner is challenge. Is this really a good idea? And the bottom left corner is probably kill, which matches up with our experience, right? If we only got to be here for 8 hours, we really don't need to worry about food and water. Like if we had time, we could get there, right? Now, things that people, I guess there's one other layer to this, right? Something people often do is drop tranches of kind of ROI right here. right? So things that are in the highest part of the upper quadrant, if you sort of divide everything into thirds, you're going to get things that are roughly equal in return on investment, because the investment is diminishing and the return is likewise diminishing as you go. And anything that is in the upper quadrant and above this line, probably a good idea to do. You want to prioritize that stuff. If it's in the upper left quadrant or the lower right quadrant, but it's between the diagonal lines, let's have a conversation about which one of those we want to pursue, right? Like, it might depend a lot on who has the cleverest idea for how to execute one of those things. Probably we don't even want to worry about that until after we've handled everything that is in the upper right-hand quadrant above the diagonal line, right? And then that bottom left-hand quadrant below the diagonal line, just kill it. Boy, do we not need to even talk about this stuff until the other stuff has been knocked out. Now, things that people mess up, one, are allowing people to cop out on choices. So it has to be the case, everything on the chart has to be on a different vertical position and a different horizontal position from everything else in the chart. It screws up your comparisons if these two things are side by side and you allow people to get away with, nah, they're about the same. Now, one of them is easier than the other, and one of them is more important than the other. You have to make that choice. Of note, though, it's like all estimates. All estimates are wrong. Some are useful, though, right? And it's informative that set booby traps is down here next to food and water rather than, say, up here on the far side of barricade doors, right? So we could argue, reasonable people can, about whether set booby traps is more or less important than food and water. But even just the fact that we know that they're next to each other and it's kind of close is kind of dispositive, right? It tells us where on the chart that we're going to be. So we don't need to worry about it for that long. We need to argue about it that long. Just like make a decision, people. It's like most other things in design. Another mistake people often make is putting the chart up first and just kind of assuming what's going to be at the center. You end up with this often, and then you have to redraw your lines. So it's way easier to do the sticky note comparisons first and then draw the lines across what happens to end up in the center so that you get good lines of division on this stuff. And then finally, I've been a lot of places where people want to talk and debate, it is or it isn't. You know, there's like, and this I think is the cardinal sin, a lot of like nudging and framing by the facilitator. If you've done a good job in the preceding exercises, everybody already has the information that they need in order to make these judgments. So the ideal, from my way of thinking, is it should be a completely silent exercise. Once you have established at that front end, when I hold it here, that means that I'm saying, if you want to vote for this thing being more important, it's a thumbs up, and the other thing, it's thumbs down. And once you've established that, you should just be able to hold the sticky up, raise your eyebrows, the whole room does thumbs up or thumbs down. You move it up, they do thumbs up or thumbs down, and so on until you place it. And then you don't need to reframe anything until you switch directions and you start doing the horizontal rather than the vertical or vice versa, right? That's the mark of a really good facilitator, is somebody who has set everything up so neatly and then framed the question so precisely that they can just do it quietly and let it happen. And the wisdom of the room emerges as they do it. Every once in a while, here's a master version of this to my way of thinking again. Almost all exercises are susceptible to Delphi forecasting. That is, in occasions where you get outliers for any of these exercises, somebody feels really strongly that the room is not thinking about which is the more effective in the right way, then you can elicit the outlier to say, here's why I think that this is actually much more impactful than the other thing. You're not arguing, you're not doing the ad hominem thing, you're just sharing what you think is a fact that others don't have. We just said booby traps, but I think it's important that we have automated 50 cal turrets with AI-enabled camera targeting that we can set up on the lawn. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, that might change how people think about this, right? And we have an unlimited supply of ammo. We're going full Call of Duty here, but y'all feel me, right? And it can be the same thing for when you're doing democracy exercises. It can be the same thing for when you're doing anything else. The trick is to let people who think that they might have some, or like estimation in user stories, right? The trick is to let find an elegant way of letting people who think they might have a really important missing fact share it, only when there is significant disagreement and without inviting extended conversation about the contents of any of these things. You have something you want to add? I think Shmer. Great. I gave you 10 seconds. We're going to revote. Nobody's changed their mind. Cool, we're moving on. Right? How was that, Dan?
Fantastic, as expected. A couple of things there. One of the things that I like is that you're using Roman voting as a facilitation method for determining, or it's something that's really similar to Roman voting, which is to achieve the consent or consensus of the group. A lot of facilitation is about arriving at consent or consensus, and those are two different things. And you need to be clear on which ones you are aiming for. So in the case of a conversation where people are, going, you can use Roman voting, up, down, middle. You ask them, do you think that we've discussed this enough? Do you think that we are all at the same place? And then people all thumbs up. And if there are people with thumb sideways or down, you can use that as a rough consensus for whether it's time to keep talking more. Another thing is, I tend to use prioritization methods in places where we don't have enough information. And one of the, like how, now, wow, or a 2x with where I'm trying to get their sense of how these things compare to each other on two axes I've invented. And one cool thing that happens when you ask people to compare concepts is they will realize that one concept is actually two, and then it'll go, oh, we have to be more specific about this one if we're going to compare it to the other ones, right? Kind of like you mentioned with the turret, booby traps could mean a lot of things. And so if they find themselves incapable of making a determination, forcing them to attempt to prioritize or compare things can really surface some of that, what's being assumed here, what's not being spoken. Oh, it's that this is actually two ideas. Okay, let's turn it into two sticky notes and see if we can compare then. And you'll find that suddenly people are capable of making those designations. Fist of Fives is another example of, love Fist of Fives. It's a great tool. Anybody else have questions about PicChart? If you're not already familiar, John Margolick is one of the champions and inventors of the Warfighter Centered Design method. So I don't know how involved he is in the in the day-to-day of that, but that's why he's such a I do crayons, nice, very
harsh but fair. I appreciate it, Barry. Good to see you.
All right, excellent. Yeah, PicChart is a fantastic tool for prioritization. Barry, did you want to run us through the Moscow method? I don't think I've ever used this one before.
So I found it a year ago, and I tried to implement it or do it, and I failed. And then I found.
Hey, we lost you, Barry.
I'm muted. My bad.
There you go.
So I tried to use it about like a year ago, and I failed. And then recently I'm doing the ACP, Agile something project management thing. And it's one of the prioritization tools that's referenced in there, and they walk you through like a step-by-step. And honestly, it's really easy, and it's a lot more fast-paced than a PicChart. And I think it's realistic depending on your stakeholders, right? Like if your stakeholders are not keen on the whole sticky note thing and they're just like, hey, let's get to the point. Here's an example that I pulled up the Moscow table. So you have somebody facilitating and you have your whole list of items, and say you're like, the prompt here is you're going to build an outside patio. And it's like, okay, Roman voting, is this a must-have item? Fridge, we start with the first thing. Fridge is a must-have item. And then they say, yes, it is, right? Same thing. And then democracy wins. But then if it's kind of like uneven throughout, then you kind of ask the question, right? So you get to should we have it? Yeah, we should have it. Could have, won't have, same thing. It's a little, it is more time consuming, but with a large crowd and people that are like senior leaders, specifically 14s maybe or higher, it seems to work more effectively. We used it a couple weeks ago just for an exercise for like whether or not we should like rebuild this office. And we were rebuilding the office. We're like, let's use the Moscow thing and determine what we need and what we don't need. And it eliminated a lot of things. And so like Ethan's point earlier about, I want to know what we're going to eliminate. What good idea are we not going to do? Right. This kind of helps do that, because then you're like, it's all based off of need. Like, I need this, I could have it, I should have it. Just because it's a good idea doesn't mean we necessarily have to have it. And then won't have, automatically eliminate. I think it's good for certain projects, not all projects. Personally, I prefer pick charting. How Now Wow or that, because How Now Wow lets you explore further, whereas this is very straightforward and direct. I already know what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm going to implement. Kind of example, if you go up, I'm holding a baby, so I'm not very, I can't move my mouse very well. Moscow technique, you can kind of see right there. That is, it's a little bit blurry, but it gives an example of a pen, right? A must-have is the shell of the pen. Should have is the ink that's inside it. The cap is a could have. You don't necessarily have to have a cap. Won't have company logo. You don't have to have that, right? So won't have, and just gives you a brief outline of what it is. And then I threw this up there as well, just some other ways of using prioritization. For instance, the Think Wrong, they have a I think it's called Do It with $100 or something like that. It's basically the 100-point method, where you're given a certain amount of money and then you allot parts of that money to this project. So I'm gonna spend $50 on this specific piece of this project, and this, and $75 or $25 on this and $25 on that, and my $100 is gone. So there's things I'm not going to do, and you accept the fact I'm not going to do these things, and they get put in the backlog. Kind of put that up there as well. I know I went down a rabbit hole, but this outlines the little chart to the left. Must have, non-negotiable. It's kind of rules to go off of as you're doing the Roman voting for whether or not you need those items, and they're all listed out in kind of a linear fashion.
One thing I really like about dot voting or like a point method where you give people a lot of points is there's if you give people, sometimes you tell people you have to put all your dots or all your points on different things, but sometimes it can be useful to say you can take all of your money and put it on one thing, if that matters to you enough. And in that way, people can basically override like a bunch of other people on a particular input if they feel strongly enough about it, right? If they have like enough skin in the game that they're willing to put all their dots on this single idea, right? Again, it's useful to understand what effect you're trying to create, because that does allow people to kind of have veto power. If everybody's putting like, put $10 on this, $10 on this, $10 on this, and somebody walks in and they're like $100 on this, and now a bunch of other people have to go and overpower that that investment. It kind of reminds me of this other funny prioritization method called chicken or pig. Who here is familiar with chicken or pig? No? Okay. So this is shared in the Agile community as a rough way of determining whose opinion matters most in a disagreement, because treating people as though their opinions are equally valid is not always useful. And the way the chicken or pig method works is it's really useful to like tell this story to your team. It goes like a chicken and a pig are hanging out and having a conversation. And I'm gonna get the story wrong, but you'll get the idea. And the chicken goes, I think we should start a restaurant. And the pig's like, oh, interesting. Okay, tell me what tell me more about it. I might be interested. And the chicken is like, yeah, we should call it eggs and bacon. And the pig is like, thinks about it for a second, is like, no, I actually, I don't think I want to open that restaurant with you, because you'd just be invested, but I'd be committed. And the idea is that in any given circumstance, some people have skin in the game. Like obviously the pig is going to have to actually invest meat off its own body in order to go in on this idea. So the pig's opinion should matter more in this circumstance. All the chicken has to do is lay eggs and then, you know, give them away. So by having this story in their heads, you can then ask people on your team who are having a disagreement, are you chicken or pig on this? And if they have skin in the game, if they feel strongly about it, if they have an emotional attachment to whatever the outcome is, their opinion should have more weight than somebody to whom this is just an intellectual exercise, right? So if I disagree with you, but I actually don't care one way or the other what happens, because it doesn't really affect me, my opinion matters less than yours. So I don't remember why that came to mind. Oh yeah, because of the being able to vote to override other people's opinions. John, go ahead.
Do you have a mechanical way to honor that in the voting process? Like if you're a self-identified pig, do you get 2 dots where the chickens get 1?
I've never attempted to apply it to an actual workshop, except in the disagreement and discussion. So I would be curious if there would be a way for people to self-identify and get more powerful dots at the outset and go, okay, you get pig dots, and then other people get chicken dots. I really like that idea.
It's always telling.
Yeah.
I think it would be a lot of self-awareness though from the community. They would have to admit and be a little more vulnerable to be like, hey, I'm here to invest, but I'm not as committed as you guys are. And I don't know if that drives a little bit of like shame. I don't want to admit it, so I'm just gonna pretend I'm a pig. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Just a thought.
It's I've seen it be really powerful in the context of teams where you're like, you know, I talked about, are we going to keep talking about this? When you have people go back to that, why am I carrying on this conversation? Some people just love disagreeing. Like I love sharing my view on theoretically why you're wrong about something, but that doesn't mean I get to waste everybody's time with that, right? So it's a really good way of shutting down that continued just going over the same thing over and over and disagreeing, when we could just go, hey, I just realized I'm chicken on this, so you get to pick. I have seen the opposite of what Nash pointed out, which is commander versus airman, in the facilitation of design sprints per AJN Smart's virtual facilitated method. They give a decider dot to the most powerful person, which is, it kind of makes sense when you think that they're the ones with their, you know, like they have to own the decision, so they get a little more of a final say, and that's the point of that. But it doesn't make sense when you think, are they actually the ones impacted by this decision? So I have seen people given different kind of dots in that regard in a workshop. in the design sprints method. Well, cool. We are at 2 o'clock, and I want to respect all your times. And I'm just curious, does anybody else have anything they'd like to surface before we close this one out?
When you were talking about chicken and pig, it made me think about lotus blossom, how you can facilitate that. So when you get to the outer petals, right, and if you're in a room full of stakeholders, then you can begin having the stakeholders pick what they have direct stake in. So it's a way to prioritize based off of people's responsibility. So outer petals get broken up into smaller, minute like tasks. Then the stakeholder in the room identifies, yeah, that's something I'm responsible for. I can take that on to help navigate to this deeper problem that's in the center of the lotus blossom. It's just, I was thinking about it as you're talking, and I was like, this could be another prioritization tool without necessarily prioritizing, but focusing on what people's responsibility is.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is really useful to think about who you're having say what's the most important, right? Who all is in the room and what should they, what do they have power over, right? Is going to determine what they determine is most doable. And whether you give that output to somebody else who might have a different view of the doability. So being aware of what stakeholders are in the room and how they might deviate from the output of that is also really, really important. So that's really interesting. I had not heard that about lotus blossom. Cool. Anybody else? All right, Shana, thanks for joining us. Thanks everybody for hopping in here for yet another ad hoc Agitare convergence. It's always great to see all y'all. And if you have ideas or want to get together to explore something else, just hit me up. I'm always game to put energy into whatever other people want to put energy into. You'd be surprised some of the weird stuff we've done in the past based on somebody thinking it was a good idea. And usually it turns out great. So we will be sharing this video more widely if you want to see it. And as always, hit us up on Slack if you have any additional questions.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks. See ya.
Daniel,